Hello everyone, welcome back to 3 News Now. I'm Stephanie Haney and today is Tuesday, May 3rd. Thank you for being here for the top stories from WKYC.com and our WKYC app. This is where we bring you the stories that matter most to you here in Northeast Ohio, because these are the stories that you are clicking on, reading, and sharing from our website and our app. And we start off today with confirmation of news that went wild on the internet yesterday. Chief Justice John Roberts has confirmed the authenticity of a leaked Supreme Court draft opinion that, if it were to become the majority opinion with 5 justices supporting it, drafted by Justice Samuel Alito, it would overturn Roe v. Wade, and that would have significant implications here in the state of Ohio. So this draft, written by Justice Samuel Alito, is about a case coming out of Mississippi where arguments came before the court in December, and it is about whether or not a ban on abortion after 15 weeks after conception could be upheld in Mississippi. In this opinion, drafted by Justice Alito, there is arguments made that Roe v. Wade was not the proper opinion when it was decided 50 years ago. So in this situation now, people are talking about how this is an extreme departure from the process of the Supreme Court's decision-making process, and how, yes, the leak itself is a departure from the process, and people are certainly surprised about it. But let's not let that take away from the actual substance of the conversation. What Chief Justice Roberts has said today, he did confirm it. He said there will be an investigation into the source of the leak, but he did reiterate that this is a draft opinion. It's not a final opinion, and that final opinion is not expected until June or July. That will be the end of this court's current term. So it was labeled a first draft of the opinion of the court. The case is Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, and again, expecting a ruling on this in late June or early July. So now let's talk about how this might impact people here in Ohio. Here is a reminder to Ohio voters. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, it's incredibly likely that abortion will become illegal very quickly, if not almost immediately, here in Ohio. The reason for that is this. There are bills pending in the legislature here in Ohio that would criminalize doctors performing abortions. There are no exceptions in these bills as written for rape or incest. Also, here in the state of Ohio, there is something that is called one of the heartbeat laws, and that's currently being challenged in court. Well, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, the basis on which that is being challenged will no longer exist. So that would effectively almost immediately put a 6-week abortion ban in place in Ohio. And those bills that are pending in the legislature right now that would criminalize doctors performing abortions would then be able to pass through the Republican-controlled legislature here in Ohio, and Governor Mike DeWine has already indicated willingness to sign these bills. Now, in other states, these bills have been signed into law and they're sitting in wait. They are trigger laws, not just trigger bills in other states. So these are the implications of the potential of Roe v. Wade being overturned if this opinion, which was drafted by Justice Alito, does become the law of the land. Now, here's a reminder. As of right now, Roe v. Wade is still the law of the land, and as that currently stands, what that means is that abortion is legal, and states are able to restrict that to varying degrees. So that's the reason this is before the court in the first place. Is a 15-week ban permissible under Roe v. Wade? That is one of the questions that was before the court, and potentially what we may be hearing about here in June or July. So we will certainly be watching as this plays out. But here is a reminder, whether you agree with this draft opinion or you disagree with this draft opinion, it does come down to our state legislatures, and these are representatives who work for us. And the way that we give them their performance reviews is with our vote. So now is a great reminder, with today being primary election day here in Ohio, to vote your beliefs and give a performance review to these representatives, because now you are aware of the current landscape in Ohio and what the legislature has been doing. Now today, with it being primary election day, there were some issues at some polling locations in a couple of counties early in the morning. This was something to deal with an iPad device check-in device when people arrived. Secretary of State Frank LaRose talked with our 3 News Carmen Blackwell about this. It was 6:30 this morning at some places where people were having issues during the check-in process. Now, at the time, LaRose said there was a backup plan in place, and it didn't impact anyone's ability to vote, but it might have caused a bit of a delay and made things take a little bit longer than you might have anticipated. He also said, though, that there were not any reports of long lines at polling locations. But then we did learn from the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections that by 8:10 this morning, the issue had been resolved. So the Board of Elections had asked if anyone did leave a polling location to please return by 7:30 p.m. to cast that vote. And here's a reminder, too, as long as you're in line by 7:30 p.m., you are able to cast that vote. And now is a great time, if you haven't already, to check out our voter guide. It's on WKYC.com and our WKYC app. A reminder that polling locations have been open since 6:30 a.m. They close at 7:30 p.m. Of course, as I just said, as long as you're in line by 7:30, you do have the right to vote. No one can make you leave that line. So if you need to know where your polling place is, we have a link for that on WKYC.com. If you want to check out a sample ballot for your area, because not all of the ballots will be the same, you can check that out at WKYC.com. Here is another reminder, though. There won't be any state House and state Senate primary races on this ballot because redistricting is still in process here in Ohio and districts have not yet been decided. But 2 big races these are statewide races, are the race for governor. Incumbent Governor Mike DeWine is seeking re-election, but he is facing challenges from other Republican candidates. There are 2 Democrats as well who will be running against DeWine. We've got information about them on WKYC.com. And then there is the U.S. Senate race. Senator Rob Portman has decided he will not be running for re-election, so that opens up the race for Republicans who may not otherwise have thought to run against Portman in a primary situation. So we've got a breakdown of those Republicans on WKYC.com and links so you can find information about their platforms. And now we move to an investigative story by our 3 News Investigates team. This is headed up by Marissa Sines and our Phil Trexler here in Cleveland. They've partnered with stations in Toledo and Columbus to bring this story to you, and this is about disturbing allegations at Cedar Point in their summer dorms for their summer staff. So using Ohio public record laws, the stations obtained 27 reports of sexual assault investigations by Sandusky police. That's since 2017. And of those 27 cases, just 3 have ended with charges. Now remember, Cedar Point wasn't even able to open fully for some of these seasons because of the pandemic. So think of that. When you think of 2017, know that there's also some lost time there. So that makes the incidence of these allegations potentially even more prevalent over those periods of time. So this week, 3 News is reporting multiple stories from the people who have come forward, from law enforcement, survivor advocates, and former workers. Raven Jones is one of those. And that story, which I won't share in detail here, but you can find it on WKYC.com if you'd like to read her recap of what happened to her. You can find that there, but I will share this quote from her, from Raven Jones. I got to a point where I honestly didn't want to live anymore. It was that intense for Raven Jones. And the investigation also found complaints of an out-of-control culture inside the dorms. Former workers say that there was lax security. There were parties, alcohol abuse by underage workers, and drug use, and there were multiple 911 calls for overdoses at the Cedar Point summer dorms. Now, Cedar Point has had its own state-accredited police department that often took the initial calls, and so far that department has refused to release their reports. Victims have come forward saying that Cedar Point allows the culture to fester and that they showed little concern for assaults and what happened to the workers. Now, Cedar Point officials declined to comment on the repeated requests for sexual assault reports, and they declined the request to release those reports. Instead, they released a statement. In part, that statement reads this way: Cedar Point takes these matters very seriously. All reports of associate misconduct are immediately responded to, reviewed, and if appropriate, escalated to local law enforcement for further investigation. You can read the full statement from Cedar Point on WKYC.com, and throughout this week, you'll hear more on the 3 News investigative reporting on these allegations. Now, today at Kent State University, there was a dedication of May 4th markers to honor the 9 people who were hurt in the 1970 Kent State shooting. This is to remember those deadly shootings that were in 1970. So that dedication ceremony was at 2 p.m. today, and there were engraved plaques permanently identifying 9 wounded students that were hit by gunfire during those protests. Kent State University is preparing to remember them, and that happened, again, that ceremony happened at 2 p.m. today, and we do know that there were people who were wounded who were on site there. You can read more details on WKYC.com. Now, here's something that you need to know for a year from now. 1 year from now, the Real ID deadline will take effect. And what that means for you is you'll have to have a Real ID compliant piece of identification if you want to fly. This deadline was sooner, but it was pushed back because of the pandemic. So what that means is the federal government will not allow people with standard driver's licenses and identification cards to travel in the air, to travel on airplanes. The BMV has made this very clear. You will have to have a federally compliant driver's license, ID card, or other acceptable form of identification, like a U.S. passport or a military ID, to fly in the U.S. Now, here in Ohio, only 46% of Ohioans, according to the BMV, have their compliant license. That was as of this morning. So to get that compliant ID, you have 1 year now if you plan to be traveling by air at all. You will need documents that prove your full legal name, your date of birth, your social security number, 2 proofs of Ohio residency, and proof of legal presence. For more on exactly what that means, go to WKYC.com and we have your links there. And now, before we let you go here, we turn to things the Cleveland Browns need to accomplish in the offseason. The NFL draft is now behind us, and they took on 9 rookies throughout the draft process. Now, it's not likely that all of those 9 people will make it to the final 53-person roster when the season begins. And there are also some holes that need to fill and a big elephant in the room. Let's address the first one first and foremost. Obviously, something has to happen with Baker Mayfield. There's a situation going on there. It's been made very clear that he is not in the future plans for the team. However, he's got a big salary hanging over the Browns, and they do not seem willing to take up any of that salary in order to trade him to another team. So finding him a new home is a top priority for the Browns, for everyone involved. We know that it's been talked to death. Another thing that the Browns need to take a look at is more wide receiver help. So they got wide receiver David Bell out of Purdue. That was with the 99th overall selection in the draft. He has a great career at Purdue behind him, but being picked so late in the draft, not clear that he would be able to step up and be one of the main players at wide receiver for the Browns. He could, but hard to say what would happen there. Now, the Browns could also be looking to second-year wide receiver Anthony Schwartz to have a big role there. But what we do know for sure is that Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones are going to be the top 2 wide receivers. So, could be a great move for the Browns to get somebody back via free agency, maybe to bring back Jarvis Landry, who is still a free agent at this point. That's something that they could be looking to do. And it's possible there could be some kind of compromise there. You know, the Browns weren't willing to pay the salary that he was supposed to be paid for this season, so they let him go into free agency. It's possible they may be able to come to some kind of compromise where the Browns can give him something that would be valuable to him and keep Landry here in Cleveland. For more on what the Browns need to do this offseason, you can head to WKYC.com and our WKYC app. That's it today for your 3 News Now update. Some notes for you. I will be back twice this evening with some updates for you, at least twice this evening, depending on what the situation warrants. We'll have special 3 News Now updates for you based on the election results as they come in, planning on coming to you as the polls close, and then if there are significant updates to be shared later in between our newscasts this evening. And then I will be out for a few days. So after that, after those broadcasts this evening, I will see you back here next week, in the middle of the week, for more 3 News Now. So between now and then, everyone, have a wonderful rest of your week. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you back here next week for more 3 News Now.